We're the largest producer in the country. The facilities we have capacity to do about 400,000 kilos of coffee a day. So that would be about 1,000,000 pounds of coffee. That's the cherry.
You said 1,000,000 pounds a day?
We built some kind of world-class infrastructure. We're now at 9,000 acres, have a little bit over 11.5 million trees. Our sights are set on becoming the largest producer of Arabica coffee in the world.
All right, listen up. This is Jamie, and I want to know if you're ready to take control of your life and reach your full potential. Think about that. Full potential. Not maybe I can, but full potential. Gobundance has offered me and offers all of you the systems, tools, collaboration, mentorship, training, accountability, and community that you need to boost your success. With Gobundance membership, you're going to get access to the Gobundance training portal, member masterminds, the Gobundance toolkit, live interactive webinars, trips, private Facebook group access, which is super, super active. Wait till you check out the Facebook group, and Gobundance GoPods. My GoPod and I are insanely close. Take your life and business to the next level with Gobundance. Go to Gobundance.com today. Apply for membership. Trust me on this. Have the conversation with me or one of our other ambassadors, and we'll make sure that you're clear on the value proposition for you. Look, you feel like right now, if I invest my money, I don't know what the return is going to be. That's why you're holding it. Better to invest in the one asset that has returned you over and over again, the maximum return. And that's investing in you and the community around you. Gobundance.com. Make sure you apply today. Enjoy the rest of the show. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the show. Today's guest is a returning guest from a little while ago, Adam Jason. He is a partner with Legacy Group, a board member on Green Coffee or for Green Coffee Company, which I'm an investor in. He's also a Gobundance member, a Colombian resident, and most importantly, he is a raving Buffalo Bills fan. Adam, welcome, brother.
Thank you, Jamie. Those are all correct facts.
Also a fellow, you married into the Latino. Your wife is Colombian, my wife's Dominican. So you got that Latin American culture in your family as well now. So we share a lot. We're bald.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
It's like we're the same people, but I have the smaller
intentionally
brain.
Intentionally buzzed.
Exactly. For everybody out there, if you have not done so already, go to Gobundance.com, fill out an application, become a member at any level. We've got a community for you. Adam, let's get a little backstory. You're a Buffalo Bills fan living in Colombia, running a coffee company.
Yes,
again, you were on a while ago, but just give us the how and where of all of those factors of you.
Sure. So I just crossed my 5-year anniversary here in Colombia, based out of Medellin, if you pronounce it without the correct pronunciation. But been here for 5 years. My background is as a corporate attorney in the U.S. I worked at two of the larger law firms there for about a decade before I came down to Colombia. So specialized in SEC capital markets, taking companies public, raising money in public and private markets, really for Fortune 500 companies, Wall Street investment banks on the underwriting side of transactions, working directly with boards of directors, etc. So that's from a professional standpoint. My path down to Colombia, as I shared with you last time we chatted, really kind of stemmed from a itch to move into an entrepreneurial role as I got farther along in my corporate America career. As you know, and I know you talk a lot about this, you get to these pivot points in your career, and in the legal world, it's very much, are you going to be a partner at the law firm? Are you going to go and work as a general counsel or in-house for one of your clients, for example, or are you going to do something entrepreneurial and kind of change things completely? I always had that itch. I could feel it inside of me as I kind of got to, year 7, 8, etc. in the law firm. I was working in Dallas at the time. I got a job offer for another firm in Houston, and I had a month gap in between the two jobs. So really, for the first time in my life, I decided to do some international travel. Had heard some good things about Colombia, wanted the experience of going to another country and actually trying to live there versus just going and spending 3 days seeing the sights and then going to the next place. So kind of, I guess at a whim, maybe it's fate, who knows, came down here, spent a month, loved it, met my now business partner at Legacy Group, who was also the founder of the green coffee company, which we'll talk, I'm sure, plenty about. And he was at the time starting both our investment firm, Legacy Group, and the green coffee company is really the flagship portfolio company for our business. Everything we do is based on connecting and serving as a bridge, I would say, between US-based investors and Latin American opportunities right now, with a focus on Colombia. So he was starting the coffee business. We needed to raise about $6 million to get the business off the ground. And my background as a SEC attorney, when you're going after and working with high net worth investors, accredited investors in the US, even though the business is operating outside, the same rules, regulations, everything apply. So my background was relevant there. Started helping him in my free time as I moved to Houston and started the new position there at the law firm. Spent about 10 months at the firm, and I could just feel that desire to do something else. So around October, November 2017, started selling everything I had. Basically, I was living at the time across from a supermarket, and I used to meet people in the parking lot that I met on Craigslist to sell them stuff that I had. So I spent about, a couple of weeks sleeping on an air mattress, came down here to Colombia, January 2018 with a book bag. And I still had the travel bag for my golf clubs. I sold the clubs, but kept the bag. So I packed that up and came down here. And, really, I would say, of course, everything kind of involves a good slice of good luck, but really have been, it's been a rewarding adventure so far. Very happy now. I have a wife and family down here, a business that I'm proud of. So that's the story. But still watch the Bills every Sunday.
That's good man, smart man.
Never in February though. Never in February. They seem to be done by then.
This year, I'm hoping. The Andre Hopkins trade. I'm hoping for it. For living in Colombia, I think we talked about this a bit last time. You were talking about the cost of living being very, very reasonable. Now, since that, I've moved here to the Dominican Republic. Cost of living is not reasonable, at least not where I live, right? It's not.
Really?
I probably have a 50% increase in my monthly cost of living, right? Like the rent for the house is twice what our mortgage is in Michigan. There's an 18% sales tax down here. Gas is $5 a gallon as we sit in March or almost April of 2023. Food is about the same, if not maybe a little bit more. The thing that's cheap is labor. We have like 7-day a week in-home help for under $1,000 a month, right? So that's cheap, but the rest is very, very expensive. Is it the same in Colombia? Like, there's been an inflationary crisis since then. Like, how's Colombia cost of living today versus when we last spoke?
I have to say, before I answer the question, I think if anybody watches this on video, if you tell them you're speaking to me from the Dominican and me from Colombia, nobody's going to really believe it. We look like the two whitest people,
tastiest humans on the planet.
Yes,
yeah, agreed.
Yes, but yes, the cost of living here is sounds much better than the Dominican. The labor here is cheap, as you mentioned. We have the same thing. We have a woman who comes and cleans the house for like 10 hours, 3 times a week. She does the laundry, cooks, etc. It's almost so cheap that you feel guilty. Like you think we pay her. I think that we pay her like $15 a day at this point, and the dollar keeps getting stronger against the peso. So every day, it's a little bit cheaper. So that, and then we have I'd say a beautiful apartment, 2 cars, nice life down here, and if we spend 50 grand a year between the two of us, between my wife and I would be I would be surprised when we're in country, if we're traveling
Sure.
or doing anything like that. But just the day to day, rent's probably, if you're just going to rent something, it'd be hard for you to spend $2,000 a month. If you're going to buy something, you're talking about penthouse apartments for like $300,000, like
Wow.
great space. We're building. It's very popular down here to have an apartment in the city and then a finca or a country home in outside the city. So
Sure.
this year we're under construction right now. It's we knocked down the house that's been in my wife's family for about 40 years, and we're rebuilding. It'll be about 7 bedrooms, 5 baths, and I think all in we're looking at spending about 100,000. So
Wow.
it's just crazy. So you can have a really great life here, and if you're earning in dollars, it just goes so far. It's fun, and I think that it's not one of those situations where, okay, everything's cheap, but life kind of stinks. There's plenty to do. Very, very international flair. You can be at the beach in an hour. You can be in the mountains where I am. You can go to Bogota, which is pretty international if you're looking for kind of the best restaurants that the country has to offer. Just a whole host of opportunities that are available for a pretty good price. And it's still, a 3-hour flight from Miami. My wife's or my brother-in-law likes to tell people that he has a country home that's 3 hours from Miami, but it's actually in Colombia. So
I love that. Yeah, same. We're about a
Yeah.
2.5 hour flight from Miami. And in fairness, we did choose to live in sort of like the premier area of the
Well, there you
premier
go.
section of the country. And we, with the kids, we had a 4-bedroom home. We got something a little bigger and all that stuff. So we could reduce our cost of living, I suppose. But when you said 50,000 for the year, that's our rent for the year. 48 grand for just rent for the year. So
Wow.
it does add up. But either way, yeah. And you're right,
Yeah.
man. Like I look at it, like there's no tan, not for me at least, right? Like there's no tan, or the lights are muting whatever minuscule tan that I have. But it's like I can't. Like I'm pasty white. Like I have to cover up. Otherwise, I don't like bronze nicely. I just light up in flames.
I thought about doing this without the lights on, just to avoid unnecessary reflections and but they're here.
Whatever.
Yeah,
We're here.
whatever.
All right. So let's talk about coffee. Colombian coffee.
Sure.
Everyone hears Colombian coffee. It's actually, is it the country with the second largest production of coffee in the world, not the first?
It'd be the 3rd largest.
What are the other two?
Brazil, Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Brazil's
Yeah.
about 50%. Vietnam's about 20%. Colombia is about 10 to 14.
Okay. And when we spoke last, Green Coffee Company was on the brink of becoming the #1 coffee company in the US, in Colombia, in the country of Colombia.
Yes.
I know that's changed, so I want to talk about
Yes.
that. But can
Yes.
you give us a sense of what exactly the business, like coffee's coffee, like what is it? What's Green Coffee Company doing? Why is it green coffee? Is it all like green, the whole energy thing? Like what? Give an idea of the business of green coffee and how it's come together and where it is today.
Sure. So the business, Green Coffee Company, we started it back in 2017 as really a alternative to commercial real estate for investors who are already comfortable in Colombia. So we had probably, I don't know, a database of couple hundred folks who were familiar with the market, had invested in some short-term rental properties here, commercial real estate, et cetera, but wanted something that was, I'd say, an alternative in the sense that you have a lot of assets. So there's the collateral there, something that can cash flow for investors. They like, hard assets. So the idea initially was consolidate farms, consolidate infrastructure, consolidation basically through purchases of farms from large families that you have generational turnover, and they pass the farms down through generations, and then eventually you get to the great grandson who wants to live in the US and not be a coffee farmer. So these opportunities become available. But what we really saw as we dove more into the market and we were participating. So that was back in 2017. We started with about 600 acres, $6 million, started, redoing the infrastructure and kind of building a business. The market here in coffee, what we saw is it's the national product of the country, third largest producer globally. Everybody who drinks coffee can relate Colombia to coffee. But the lack of investment in the industry has really extended for, call it 40 years, without exaggeration. You also have a very decentralized structure where 95% of all the farmers own 3 acres or less. So kind of call it fresh eyes, fresh capital, a different way of looking at the market. We saw the chance to have something beyond just a asset play, that alternative to commercial real estate, and really create an enterprise around the industry. So kind of where we've gone from that initial 600 acres, we closed 2 acquisitions last week. We're now at 9,000 acres. We have a little bit over 11.5 million trees. We're the largest producer in the country. When you and I talked, we were at the number 3 position about a year and a half ago. So we've grown exponentially since then. We had 11 farms that we were owning at the time, and now I think we're up to 39.
Wow.
We've built some kind of world-class infrastructure around the operation, and now we're looking at, okay, how do we really grow this thing into a monster? Our sights are set on becoming the largest producer of Arabica coffee in the world. We could talk about kind of what that means, Arabica versus Robusta, but
wait. It's Arabica, not Arabica?
It goes back to that Medellin. It's
I've heard TV commercials that say Arabica. I'm going with Arabica.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
They know their audience.
True.
They know their audience. So, yeah.
So you're going to become the number 1 Arabica bean producer in the world. That's the objective. And
that's the next goal.
And is that the bean? Is that the most popular bean? I don't know anything about coffee, so.
Actually, the most. You have basically 2 strands globally: Robusta and Arabica. Robusta is the crappy stuff that comes from Brazil. It's like your Maxwell House, Folgers coffee of the world. Usually a very high caffeine content, but usually something you got to put milk and sugar in to be able to consume and enjoy. So that's the low end. That's the low end coffee, and it essentially kind of grows like a weed. Arabica is kind of the more, I would say, higher quality coffee. It's anything globally that's kind of winning awards for quality, and Colombia is, almost all Arabica. So these different countries. So if you talk about kind of where does it rank globally, it's number 2 in terms of Arabica, number 3 in terms of coffee overall. So the largest producers right now of Arabica are in Brazil. They have all the information we can gather is that they have a little bit over 5,000 active hectares, which is each hectare is about 2.2 acres. So we're getting close. We're getting close. It's something we can achieve in the next 2 years, I think, and we're getting kind of more and more opportunities to buy as our name becomes more well known in the market. It was not like that at the beginning. Before, it was knocking on doors, trying to buy farms from, usually it's their family owned, so it'll be 5 uncles, 3 cousins. They all have to agree on the price. We're kind of in a different realm now. It's gotten easier. Of course, new challenges present as we kind of look to the other side of the business and how do we scale and these other things. But from an acquisition standpoint, we're fortunate to have a great investor base that keeps kind of providing the capital, and the business itself putting capital back in to grow. But we want to get that dominant market position in Colombian Arabica coffee.
Okay. As I wrote a couple things down because I want to do this aside, and then we'll come back to it. But it is funny. Two bald, pasty dudes from upstate New York, both Bills fans, Bills Mafia. If anybody knows, like we're jumping through tables and shit, and here we are talking about the cultured, how cultured we are living in other countries. But on that point, like I hear people say, like, "Oh, I'm going to be down in like Punta Cana." I'm like, "Oh God, it hurts to hear it." Like Punta Cana, right? Like there's a way so you do get comfortable. I won't forget this. My wife, it drives her nuts whenever I tell the story. But there was some Southern lady at a resort recently. We went to a resort for when the kids were off. Oh my God. She goes up to the bar, like the swim up bar at this all-inclusive resort, and she's speaking Spanish to the guy. Like I forget, I think his name was Sergio behind the bar. And it was like un margarita, poor favor, Sergio. And poor Sergio just had to be like, wow, your Spanish is so good.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We sound like that wasn't us just a short time ago. It took a couple of years in, you're like, oh, that sounds horrible. That's ridiculous. Like a few years ago, I'd be like, you sound like that. And I probably 100%. Still do when I'm
No, 100%. That's my point. Like, it's funny how your context expands and it shifts, right? Because like when you said Arabica, it's like, okay, that's the way to say it. That's the phrase. That's what you're around. That's the actual thing. But we've Americanized it to Arabica. So for me, not hearing that all the time, it sounds silly. Just like listening to this lady now use this terrible, like Englishized Spanish with a Southern accent.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
Awful. Anyway, but you're right. You were the same not that long ago. I grew up with the being cultured for sure. I want to ask about this. So you mentioned about infrastructure efficiencies, and I don't know how this will relate, but I mean, when we drive around here, a lot of sugar fields, right? Sugar's a big crop here. It's a big export. And you see like these massive fields, which you would think, oh, the equipment that they're going to run through here to chop this down. It's like, no, it's guys with machetes kind of thing. Right. And I always think about it, like in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, how much more efficiently this could be run with a sense of an infrastructure or operational thought behind it. Right. But at the same time, labor is super, super cheap. So what I'm picturing of what you've described, and I've heard this a couple of times, is you've got all these like one-off farms, like owned by mom and pop owners for years, right? A fefew acres here, a few acres there, and you've consolidated that to 9,000 acres of productive land to produce coffee, right? With 11 million trees on it or whatever. Now, these aren't all like in one big, nice area. Like they're spread out, right? These are a little here, a little there, correct?
We basically consolidate around. You have whole towns here that are coffee towns. Yeah. So basically, it's you establish a nexus in an area that's famous for coffee. Why? Usually, it's already growing there. Two, the town population is used to that industry, so they know that you have good labor pools in those markets because they know that industry. And then we'll grow out from there. But everything is around having basically consolidated processing infrastructure. So the town where we first started here is a town called Salgar, about 2 hours south of Medellin, where I'm talking to you from now. Famous coffee town, basically a monocrop town. We started with acquisitions there, and it's basically like, all right, we want to try and buy essentially this whole town. So just these last 4 months or so, we've started out expanding outside of the town, but you want to still be close enough to your processing infrastructure where you can bring the crop until you have that next processing facility. So it's about consolidation of infrastructure. The farms that we have, I'd say from one to the next, the greatest distance is probably about an hour. But we try to make them as contiguous as possible. It would be the same theory as, if you buy 10 Airbnbs, you don't want them spread all over the place. You want them to make it easier from a logistics standpoint. So we try to do the same with farms. We only are really buying like basically 200-acre size tranches of land or above. So we don't buy usually from the small 3-acre farmers. I say usually, I mean basically never at all. It'll be these big land holding families that
Yeah.
typically have that generational turnover, or all their family wealth is tied up in the land, and there's no way to tap into
Extract it.
any of that equity. Yeah, there's no like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to go to the bank and refinance it. It's just not the same situation. And then what we've been able to do in coffee is really a lot of the infrastructure and technological development is based around the processing. So all the quality determinants for coffee are going to be, is it a consistent size? Is it free of defects? Are things appropriately ripe? So it's like you're making orange juice and you put one unripe orange in, it completely changes the flavor. Coffee's
Yeah.
very similar, but from as you mentioned with the sugar cane and the machetes, if you come down to Colombia and see a coffee farm, almost all the coffee here grows like literally on the sides of mountains. So technology is not there yet where you could run a tractor up the side of the mountain and only pick the good stuff. You also have the dynamic of ripe beans growing next to unripe beans. So one red one, which means they're ripe, versus a green one, it kind of takes an eye at this point to pick those off the tree. If you go to a big coffee farm in Brazil, you'll see mechanized tractors passing through, but they're not as quality dependent. They just want to get the coffee off the trees. Playing in the quality space and Arabica versus Robusta, everything, essentially the point is everything from a collection standpoint is still very, very manual. I think there's a big opportunity to try and fix that, whether it's through drone technology that actually does the collecting, or the issue you have is, imagine you're on the side of a mountain, you pick a 100-pound bag of coffee and you have to carry it to the silo where all the collection is done. There's a tremendous amount of wasted effort and time in that transportation process. So drones that can, call it kind of come pick up, take the coffee bag, dump it off, the drone comes back, you load it back up again. Something like that could be a big efficiency, but the technology is.
How close is that?
Is not there yet. I mean, the drones are there, something that could actually, carry that amount of weight, I don't think is impossible to do. So we're just kind of keeping our eyes on it, but it's something that has to get solved, I think, in the not too distant future. What I imagine, what you're seeing in the Dominican in sugar is not dissimilar from here, where, as people think more about moving to cities and there's more opportunities in the kind of mine worker space, you have less and less people who want to stay in the field, work in the farms. So a big part of our strategic kind of build out of the business is making sure we still have those labor pools, because you can have all the land and all the coffee in the world, but if you don't have people to go pick it, or you don't have the guys with the machetes to cut down the sugar, it's not worth very much to you. So labor in agriculture is going to be I think a big focus, either making it more attractive for labor to continue in the industry, or supplementing it or replacing it with technology is kind of the only way to go.
Makes sense. Okay. Well, that answered my question, because I was thinking about it. Like, I'm picturing all of this. So you're purchasing in as much as you can contiguous spots, and then leveraging technology. Or leveraging technology for the processing. So,
Yes.
To your point, so you buy a farm, a 200-acre farm that's generationally owned. They obviously have a system and a process for things. What's the difference between how they were processing versus what you're doing with processing? Like, where's the economies of scale or the leverage that you get, or the efficiency that you gain? Compare that for me. I just want to get a sense of mom and pop processor with a decent sized farm. I'm sure they have a system versus your processing.
Yeah, I would say there's differences all the way from typically all the way from kind of start to finish. So You'll have different fertilization practices. You know, if you don't have access to capital, maybe you're only fertilizing once a year, or you don't have kind of that mapped out. You know, we try to fertilize 4 to 5 times a year to make sure that coffee is kind of in the position it needs to be. We have professional agronomists on the team. If you're a family, in most cases, they're not going to have a trained agronomist. It's going to be, what did you kind of learn through being in the industry? You know, so that planting, what's the right density to have for optimal growth? How do you monitor humidity levels? How do you control for insects? Just all these things that go into the actual growing of the plant. You then have as I said, like if you go to the typical coffee farm, the processing facility is going to be put everything all into one machine, take off the pulp, put everything through the processing, no matter what the size is, what the color is, what the maturity is. So you get a lot of defects if you don't have the right technology, if you don't have the right processing capabilities. That's very typical if you've built the technology 40 years ago. A lot of it'll be like people literally with hand cranks that depulp the coffee cherries. The team we have and that we've built, our CEO, our COO, those guys are all agro-industrial engineers. They've brought technology over really from the olive industry to be used for our coffee cherry sorting, depulping, etc., which we'll talk about kind of the benefit of having that byproduct and that leftover, but you know, to basically extract the bean and not destroy the skin, but also to be able to sort correctly by size, weight, all these things that going into establishing the right quality, which of course has a different price point in the market.
Makes sense. What's the volume of production today? Like, I don't know, if bags per day, revenue, whatever numbers you want to share, but give me an idea of like, what are you cranking out?
Yeah, the facilities we have capacity to do about 400,000 kilos of coffee a day. So, and that's the cherry. So that would be about 1 million pounds of coffee if you're
what is that? What's 1 million pounds of coffee? Can you quantify that? Just so I mean, that sounds like a lot, but is that like, I don't know, like how much does Starbucks do a year? You know what I mean? Like, can you just give me kind of a reference point to have an understanding of, you said 1 million pounds a day?
That's the capacity of the coffee cherries. So it's kind of technical, but basically for every cherry you take off the tree, coffee grows just like the fruit cherries that you're used to. About 80% of it is the pulp, etc. So the seed, it makes up 20%. So, you know, when you get it down to the seed, you're talking about 200,000 pounds of actual coffee seed per day.
Okay. All right. And any sense, like, what is that? What's 200,000 pounds of coffee in comparison to, like, how much does the U.S., well, you know, I don't know if you know I don't expect you to know it, but like, I can even Google it, but like, what is the amount of coffee like consumed in a day in the US or something like that? Do you have any idea?
Globally, I know it's about 2 billion cups per day are consumed. You probably, to make a cup of coffee, like if you go to the store and you buy a bag of Starbucks ground coffee at the supermarket, you could probably get, you know, depending on how kind of thick you want it, let's say you get like 40 cups of coffee from that bag. You know, it's very little coffee that goes into each cup. I mean, each like you use a K-pot or whatever, that's the amount of coffee you're using. So, you know, if you were to translate that, like for example, when we become the largest in the world in Arabica, we'll be providing, you know, less than 5% of all the global coffee. The market is just huge. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the context I was looking for. What does that look like? I mean, the market is massive. I see 2 billion cups of coffee. Did you know that tea is 3.7 billion cups a day?
I didn't know that. Is that true? It's all the Asian countries.
Google says it, so it must be. Yeah, China's a huge population, India, huge population, right? So it makes sense. But Wow, that's interesting. Okay, that gives me a
Yeah,
sense of it. All right, the pulp, the cherry.
yeah,
So again,
yeah.
I'd never looked at a coffee bean, so I didn't even know it's like this big thing, whatever. I don't know if it's the right size with a little bean inside, right? So like,
Hmm.
what happens? What has happened historically with the cherry? And I don't know. I think you're doing some stuff. Like, give me some context on the cherry. Is there any use to it?
Yeah, the history of it is you take out the bean, the coffee, and all the other stuff is either left to rot, thrown in the water. Some people try to use it as fertilizer because it has, sugars, proteins, these kinds of things. But if it were an effective fertilizer, people wouldn't be buying fertilizer. They would just be using the coffee cherries to fertilize their farms. So it's essentially been garbage for the entire history of coffee.
Wow.
But nobody's really taken at scale. And there's some small operations that are looking into it, but basically, the all of that product between the sugars, the proteins, the antioxidants, everything that's contained in that fruit can be used for other byproducts. So what we've been looking at for a couple of years now is, wow, we have tons of this excess. If we're going to try and do 50 million pounds of coffee, we're going to have 200 million pounds of this leftover. Call it the coffee cherry. So what do we do with this? So there's been some research studies that were done in Germany, some in the U.S. at Cornell. Like what are some appropriate applications to basically turn all of this garbage into some consumer products or used for energy, etc. What we've seen to be the most effective from a price standpoint is to turn all that sugar that's contained in the coffee cherries into ethanol. Ethanol can be used for energy creation. It can be used in food grade products, but it's also the base for vodkas, gins, etc. So what we're doing at the farms right now, we already have the test distillery at the farm there that can do about 120 or the end product will do 10 liters a day. But our thesis is, let's take all this garbage and turn it into revenue for the business and create vodkas, gins, spirits from the sugars that are in the coffee cherry. So the facility that we're building right now, the distillery, will be capable of processing about 12 or creating about 12,000 liters of pure ethanol per day. So
Wow.
if you put water into that to create vodka, which people think vodka is like something super special, it's really just ethanol with distilled water to dilute it down. That'll create about 38,000 bottles of vodka per day when we're operating at full capacity. So you have the opportunity to, in a worst case scenario, sell it to the energy companies. In a mid tier scenario, sell it to the other alcohol producers in the country so they can create their own products, or internationally, we can export it. The other one is go closer to the consumer, which is always kind of where the more money is to be made, and create products like a vodka or gin, these different spirits that people are consuming. So that's the next big investment. It comes out of a need. It's actually a cost for us to try and get rid of all this raw material. But also, the margins on a bottle of vodka created from essentially waste product, we're talking about 80 to 90%. From something like that, where you're only paying for bottling costs and shipping. So that's the idea: is make every coffee cherry that we take off the tree worth more money by using everything that it contains.
Is it not more cost effective just to sell it to an existing vodka or gin producer? I'm just thinking, because you also have to market it then, don't you? If you're going to do it yourself?
Yeah, I would say if you're selling it, as call it a food grade product, probably looking at like a $4 per gallon price in that area. our kind of projections or what we're looking to do with our own vodka is $8 per bottle wholesale. So that's 750 milliliters under a liter. So just a huge difference. But what I expect to see is we're going to have so much product that it's going to take time to build a market for the vodka. Like you said, you have to market it, you have to get it out there. It'll take some time to do that. For some time, I think some of the ethanol will be selling for energy creation. Ethanol has a history of for basically using gasoline in the U.S. Mm. But using that ethanol for energy creation without, what I don't want to do is give somebody else the story that we're creating by being a supplier for them for their own product that they're going to create and turn into a vodka. I don't want to build competitors for us by giving them the raw materials, because if nobody else is doing it at scale and the supply becomes integral, we want to keep that supply to ourselves. For anybody else to do this, they're going to have to invest in the distillery. They have to kind of create what we're already in the process of creating. We don't want to give that away. So it'll be a growth of the vodka business while we're using that ethanol for other sources that don't create competition for the products we're trying to create.
All right. We've talked a lot about our similarities. This is where I'm going to distinguish us as you having a much bigger brain than me. So let me just make sure let me make sure I understand this part. So if you take the raw product and sell it to an existing distillery, somebody who's going to produce vodka with it or whatever, you're saying you get $4 per gallon. Did I get that right? $4 per gallon for that.
That's what we're seeing. Yeah.
Okay. But if you do it, bottle it up yourself and ship, you get $8 per gallon, correct?
It would be $8 per 750 mil. Let's just make it liters. So 4 liters in a gallon. So it'd be $32. $32 for that same gallon if we sell it as a wholesale
so
vodka.
It's eight times the income if you sell the vodka yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Exactly.
I was gonna say, but aren't there back end production costs that dilute that? I thought it was $4 to $8. I'm like, isn't that $4 difference eaten up by the fact that you got to now create and produce and bottle and do it? But you're talking $32 for a gallon if you produce and create it yourself. So yeah, there's probably it gets eaten away between 4 and 32, but it's still a massive profit potential. And is that another company? Is that all part of Green Coffee from a top line revenue perspective?
Yeah, it'll be a subsidiary. We keep it separate for licensing purposes. The liquor industry has its whole realm of regulations, and you can't have the intermingling. But like all of our investors in the coffee business own the vodka business. That's you.
Me?
Yes, sir.
I get a piece of it?
It's all part of the same. Yes, sir.
Keep going then.
Yes,
keep
sir.
doing what you're doing. What was I going to say to you about? One question is why? Well, let me ask this: is this like patented? This process, like, once you do this, can it be duplicated by other coffee companies, or is it a licensable or whatever process? Like, how does that work? Is it just something like, no, it's a technology that's out there. A company's going to sell it to all the coffee companies, you being one of them. It just beefs up, your revenue as a result of being able to bolt on this other business.
Yeah, somebody, from what we've seen, it's not something that you can get a patent over. Just the vodka creation. That said, we've seen the potential to, like, all the research studies that have been done, we can potentially tie on to some of the patents around like the actual process that goes into it, but not like the idea of creating vodka. But I think the one barrier to entry is, if you want to do it at scale, you need to have a lot of coffee farms, and you need to have a lot of, I guess, fast moving infrastructure, because once you separate the bean and the cherry, it starts to rot immediately. You basically have 24 hours to turn it into ethanol. Otherwise it's no good. So you have to have somebody who's built the infrastructure around it, understands the process, has built the processing capability where they're actually preserving the cherry in the process of kind of separating it from the bean. So I'd say there's barriers to entry there, but it'll definitely be like we want to get to market fast and have the story. I think, because we're looking at that consumer facing model for the vodka specifically, it's going to be important that we know that go to market, tell the story, the Latin America connection. I don't think I think it'll have a stronger brand resonance than, if a Vietnamese company wanted to do it, for example. It's going to be, I guess, a little bit less symbiotic between the product and the country versus coffee and
explain that a little bit. I'm not sure I'm clear on that. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, like we started with, I think everybody can associate in their minds coffee with Colombia. I think there's an audience around very national pride, but Latin pride around products coming from the region that we can tap into. I think, you see a huge Hispanic base in the US right now that they tend towards those products that come from Latin America. So I think that's the audience that we're going to be looking for, as well as selling in country. Right now, there's not a single national vodka or gin product in Colombia. So we can kind of separate ourselves there. But if you saw, a vodka on a shelf and the story was, oh, this came from coffee cherries in Vietnam, I don't know if there'd be that connection, from the consumer standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. That makes sense. So, and this is, again, comparison of brain size. So I want to make sure I clearly understand this. So there is a process that's been developed or being developed in order to convert what used to be waste into something usable. So in your case, you're thinking of doing it this way.
Yes.
But it's not exclusive to the first company that gets so green coffee starts leveraging this process. So can whatever green coffee company exists in Vietnam, in Brazil, in any country that produces coffee, correct? So like anyone can use this process, but you feel as though first to market and marketing from a Latin American country is more attractive to the end consumer, or is more attractive to the people that are putting this process together to invest their time and energy with to do this?
I think more attractive to the end consumer.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, it's like bourbon companies, right? Like there's nobody that has a patent over the process of creating bourbon, but it becomes, if you're playing in the alcohol space, it becomes a marketing, who wins the marketing race. The good thing for us is, you start a bourbon company, you got to pay for all the raw materials. You got to have somebody create the bourbon for you. For us, if we can turn the waste into anything, we've won.
Yeah.
So it's we got to do something with it. Let's try to make money with it. The worst thing that happens is we sell it as energy.
Yeah.
Sell it for fuel creation. But that's our downside. There, we're talking about probably right now that would be traded like a commodity. So you're looking at like $2 a gallon.
Yeah, but now it's just pretty much an expense, like you said, it's a full-on expense just to deal with the waste. And now you can actually generate something all the way up to, wow, a vodka company. Interesting. I love it, man. That's incredible. Okay.
Trying to be innovative.
Yeah, no, you are being innovative, right? It's beyond that. So, okay. What is so you said you're going for the number one Arabica bean to be the number one Arabica bean company in the world at this point.
Yes.
That's how far out before you think that happens, and what's the next step? Is it continuing with the process of growing the size and the amount of trees that you have in production within green coffee? Is there another big step that needs to come? Like, how long before you see yourselves being able to be the number one Arabica bean company in the world? And what's like the next big milestone that needs to happen for that to happen?
I think we could do it in the next 2 years.
Wow, no shit.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be. I mean, we're getting acquisitions every day. Like I told you, when we talked a year and a half ago, we were at like 2,300 acres. Now we're at 9,000. If we can double that again, we're right there. We're right there in that wheelhouse. We're looking at acquisitions now. I bet you by the time this podcast goes out, we'll have finished another 3 farming acquisitions.
Are you hitting a point of saturation in that regard in Colombia, being that you're looking for contiguous or fairly close? Like you won't, I mean, you can't, once at a certain point, you can't just double and triple forever, right? So like, are you reaching that, or is there still like massive, massive growth potential within the country?
Yeah, I mean, if we get to the largest Arabica producer in the world, we'll be like looking at, from our own production, less than 5% of all the coffee coming out of Colombia. We also do a lot of buying of coffee from other farmers around us that we can include in our production. You're essentially flipping it for a higher price. If we are basically 1-for-1 between coffee we're producing and coffee we're buying, that we'd probably be in the range of 10% of all of the coffee in Colombia, and that would be like 1% of all the coffee that's getting sold globally. So a long way of saying there's a lot left to buy. There's, I would say, a limited number of in some ways, a limited number of counterparties that we want to work with, because we don't want to be buying like those 3-hectare farms that we're talking about. But we have a roadmap of farms that are available to easily get us to that number 1 spot if we execute on those with more left to go. So we're not running out of options. Once we get to a certain scale, I think it'll be more important to have a lot of the buying operations going on where we're working with the smaller farmers, because then you don't have to make the investment, but you still get the production.
How are you able to acquire? Like, what's the ratio? Like, so if you target 100 farms, how many do you buy?
Right now, people just call us and tell us they want to sell their farms. So
why do they want? Is it just what you said before? They're just, hey, look, I'm sitting on this. I'm asset rich, cash poor. I want out. I see what you're doing. You're starting to already, put too much pressure on me as it is. So take it and give me a windfall. Is that essentially what they're saying?
It really is. Yeah. People hear that there's a buyer. There's never been a buyer at scale in the market for an extended period of time, and they see it as a potential. They see it as a potential opportunity. I do think, though, and it's a popular question we get from investors, is, well, why doesn't Starbucks or Nestle, one of these?
That was my next question.
Come and just pour money on it.
Yeah.
Right? It's one. There's this from being in Latin America. Yeah, so much of what deals you can get done is just building trust. People have to know, because you worked with a family member of theirs, that you're somebody of your word and you're going to complete a transaction. There's that part of it too. But then it just takes a hands-on approach to be doing these deals, and we're working in a space where I think the deals that we're doing are still of interest to us that wouldn't be interesting for Nestle, right? Like, they have a huge balance sheet. Their balance sheet is probably the size of nations in terms of the money that they would have, the cash that they would have on hand to deploy. They're not going to go farm to farm and buy 100 acres or whatever here in Colombia and try and consolidate. More likely, they would say, all right, you guys have built this for us. Let us buy it.
Yep. I just wrote that down
from you. Yeah, exactly.
I was writing that down as a question. Yeah.
That's the play. And then you don't have any domestic, you really don't have any domestic competition here from, there's another local buyer who's buying. Now, the second largest producer in the country, we're now 2 times their size, and they're not looking to buy anymore. They're becoming kind of a acquisition target for
I was going to ask that,
us.
Yeah, you're going to say,
so
you could buy number 2 and that could be a big problem solved as far as like growth toward what you're trying to do.
Yes. Yeah. and that would add a big chunk of land to the operation. So you just don't see a lot of competition. So when the opportunity comes, people are eager to sell, and honestly, cash in less developed markets, really having cash on hand goes a long way. It wouldn't be atypical here to have a negotiation for farms where it's, okay, Jamie, I'll buy your farm, but I'm going to give you 2 apartments, a tractor, an old car. These deals just don't come together like you'd be used to if you're buying commercial real estate in Miami. It's not, Blackstone down here operating. So it'll be, we got cash. We have a big pool of foreign investment coming in. These guys are willing to sell for, I'd say, really outstanding pricing because we're a cash buyer. So I think this year alone, we have to do independent third-party evaluations for our annual audit. This year, we paid about $3.5 million under market price for the farms that we bought.
Wow.
So
okay.
We're not, it's not like we're overpaying to capture a market share. There's a lot of willing buyers.
The point real quick, I wrote down a couple of questions to remember, but the point real quick you made about how business is done in Latin America, it resonates with me. It resonates with me because I've said this before, and you're kind of giving me a little bit of clarity on what the phrases I've used before. But it's like where I live, where you live, I'm sure it's the same. Like people think like, oh, the electric goes out, plumbing doesn't work. It's like, no, infrastructure wise, at least for me, it's all developed. We don't lose electric.
Right.
We have good Wi-Fi. There's cell service. It's all there. But
Right.
societally, it operates more like 1980s or 1990s did in the U.S. I feel like there's like a 30-year cultural lag in that regard. And here's what I mean. When we were renting this house, my wife's aunt was the broker. The guy renting it was a friend of her uncle's, right? So it was like very, very much like we found the house through like the friend of a friend. It wasn't like there was a sign out front or anything like that, right? And I remember being so annoyed on a Saturday because we were Airbnb for like 4 or 5 weeks while we found our permanent place, and we ended up finding this place. And it was like, oh, great, we're going over to the house to meet and do all the stuff on Saturday. And, we got to get the kids up together and bring them all over. So I'm like, cool, we're going to sign leases, do wires and all of that. But it was more like, no, we're sitting down and having coffee. I'm like, why the fuck am I here? Right? Like you're wasting my time in my US mindset. Like I'm here to do business and get shit done. I got places to be, but no one had to be anywhere. Right. It was more about, do they feel comfortable with me? How do I come across my wife, having a cup of coffee? To your point, it's very much more about the handshake meaning something. What's that Jerry Maguire? Like my handshake is strong as oak. Right. And even as another aside, in Detroit, there's a restaurant called the Whitney, which was the Whitney family, a big construction family from the turn of the century, built this massive home in Detroit, beautiful, when Detroit was like one of the top markets in the country. And there's a room in that house that's like the handshake room where deals were made, not like ironing it out and attorneys are getting together, but like shake hands. And that's very much how I see business done here. So to your point, it makes sense to me. Like, why doesn't Nestle come in? Why doesn't one of these Starbucks come in and just start doing this? It's like, it's just done differently in a Latin American country. And you've cornered that. Now, the follow-up question I had after all that ramble was, what is the exit plan? Is it to sell to Nestle? Is it to go public? Is it one of the two you haven't decided yet? Like, what's the exit? Or is it just continue to grow and become, a huge, I don't know. What's the exit plan?
We set the business up from, I'd say, the beginning to have that dual track possibility. So people hear Colombia, but everything is structured out of the US. So we have a Delaware holding company where all the investment comes in. The Delaware holding company owns the operations here in Colombia. For investors, it's the same as like you're owning shares in Apple, right? And we wanted to make it attractive for a potential sale so that somebody's not buying Colombian entities directly, they're not familiar with it, etc. Or that's, I'd say, more reputable on a public market like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. My experience in this world as an attorney is all these transactions get done on a dual track. I remember when we were doing the IPO for Yeti Coolers a few years ago, they were basically up for sale until the night before they did the IPO. So what you want to do is build a business that has that optionality. We could sell to Starbucks, we could sell to Nestle, but if they don't want to buy it, it's attractive to the public markets. Right now, to be attractive to the public markets, you got to be a profitable business, right? 18 months ago, that wasn't really the case. You had pre-revenue companies IPOing at $2 billion valuations. But now we've gotten away from that sum. But our position is, we want the business to be able to IPO. We want it to be able to be sold. And we're trying to get to that, call it exit event or liquidity event for our investors in 2026. That's the promise we've essentially made to our investors since back in 2017. We gave ourselves about 9 years to get there. And a lot of the time frame has to do with what does it take to get to kind of maximum value, at least at that point. Like, for example, when you buy coffee farms, there's a development period before it's at optimal production. If you're adding more farms on, when you get to like that 2026 point, you really want a lot of production and being, kind of as optimized as you possibly can. Add on additional businesses like the things that we're doing with the byproducts, so you get those high revenues, high profitability. Moving more from the green coffee, where we're focused now, to roasted coffee, which is what you're used to buying in the supermarket. So that vertical integration takes time, etc. But the idea is 2026, basically be allowing for or having conversations with potential buyers, but also preparing for the IPO of the business in the US. And we're targeting one of the big exchanges of either the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ.
Okay. Talk about risks for a minute. So Colombia has as well known for coffee as they are in some ways on the downside for, the drug trade and cocaine in the past. And I know there's been some discussion warning about, Colombia being a narco state and all of that stuff from the U.S. Attorney General. What about political risk? You're all in one country. What is the political risk, or have you forecasted that? Do you have any sense of it, or just being on the ground there? Like, what is your take on that?
Yeah, politically, what we see is we just had a new president elected in June last year. The first left-leaning president in the history of the country. Pretty much been a, call it, right-wing conservative country for an extended period of time. The election was super close, but the left-leaning candidate won. But similar macro events are kind of impacting what's going on, I think, from a political standpoint. So just like in the US, you have a lot of inflation in Colombia. A lot of that inflation is caused by the fact that the country has gotten away from agriculture, particularly in kind of prime food areas. So like rice, corn, those kind of areas that affect a lot of the food products that you eat. But essentially, I think what we're seeing on a political standpoint is agriculture being basically the prime focus, along with clean energy from the new government. Now you got to do it responsibly. It's got to be kind of you're doing right by your employees, you're doing right by the environment. But what we're seeing is basically a tremendous amount of support from the government. Last year, we got the award from the Colombian Congress for best innovation in agriculture here in Colombia. So we're seeing a lot of support. We opened the second of our two processing facilities in October. We had members of the Colombian Senate, Congress people here, We have the governor for the state where we're located. I think they see again, it's the national product of the country, and it's been lacking in investment domestically and internationally for an extended period of time. So people take pride in the product. And I think they're proud to see a lot of people, especially internationally, taking a bet on the industry and the people. So we're getting a lot of, I guess, pats on the back for bringing a lot of money into the industry and really growing something that people are proud of. In the town itself, now you have roads improving, you have schools improving. It sounds like silly things, but like school uniforms that they never really had, rising home values in the areas that we're operating, increased tax revenues for the governments that we're operating. So everybody's happy to see. I won't say everybody because it can't be 100%, but the people who matter are happy, I think, with what we're bringing to the country from a foreign investment standpoint and the impact it's having on the local people. One program we're really proud of is this year we'll plant about 2.5 million new trees on the coffee farms. That requires a huge greenhouse operation to grow the seedlings and get them ready for planting. All of the greenhouse is managed through our single mothers, heads of households program. So there's a local organization that if you're a single mother, head of the family, you can affiliate with, and then they help you find employment. So our entire greenhouse operation is managed by the single mothers. So things like that, where you're doing business in the right way, is getting the, I think, attention that we want to. Everybody wants to see more jobs, people taken care of, less people dependent on the government for their livelihoods. So I think we're doing things in a productive way that we're proud of there, for sure.
Does a left-leaning government, though, lead to your point, like there's always benefits to either side, right? The right leaning, there's benefits, left leaning. But one of the things you talked about, roads, infrastructure, investment, and that seems to be more of probably a left-leaning agenda, right? Like that, I think, anyway. But along with that come social programs, healthcare, minimum wage reform, pensions, all of that. Does a left-leaning regime put pressure on what you're describing as a already maybe tight labor market or diminishing labor market because of the move toward more of an urban setting in this generation? I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I think by increasing the wages, we'll see a wage increase here. That I guess gives people the ability to stay in these areas if they're earning a fair wage. I mean, we're basically the only ones who pay employees like actual benefits. It was like things we take for granted. Again, I'm sure you've seen this in the Dominican. I'd imagine those sugar farmers that you saw are, they're not getting health. Right.
Yeah.
And no healthcare in place for them,
yeah.
No workers' compensation, these kinds of things. So that drives our costs up, but we also get the offsetting benefit of, you get all these incentives to invest in technology. You also have, because of the, I would say, historical conservative nature of the country, I think a lot of the opportunities that are coming to us right now from a buying perspective are because of the uncertainty around what does it look like for the government? What does the government mean to me? Maybe I should get some cash and not have land. And whether I don't think that's rational, but again, it's, what's the opportunity that we can find in the uncertainty that's going on? So I think some of the acquisitions are coming to us because of that uncertainty as well. So, what does it mean for the overall business if taxes increase? By the way, the tax increases are still put us at a level below what companies would be paying in the US. So when people hear tax increases, they think it's like, oh, we're going to 60%. It's like, no, we're going to 15 for dividends, so lower than what we're seeing in the US in many cases. So it's all that let's operate within the opportunity we're given, try and maximize it. We're also at a very favorable time with the strength of the US dollar against the peso, but many foreign currencies. So like the same when we started the business, $1 was equal to about 3,000 Colombian pesos.
Wow.
Right now, $1 is equal to about 5,000, 4,700, depending on when you listen to this. But the pricing has not really changed. Another characteristic of Latin America, I would say, is the time value of money is not something people really think about. They want a specific price. You give them that price, you can give it to them over the course of 10 years, but they got their price.
Yeah.
There's that dynamic. So essentially everything that we're buying now is substantially less expensive than it was even a few years ago, but the pricing overall hasn't really changed from what we're seeing in the market. So I'd say it's maybe a nature of just kind of being entrepreneurial and operating in a business climate, but the uncertainty creates the opportunity is my takeaway. So if it's okay, this family farm is going to have increased labor costs because of the government, now they become an acquisition target for us, and we can buy them at a great price.
Makes sense. Okay, no, I get that. Other risks. I was just thinking about this as we start to wrap up here, but other risks. I think about drought or COVID happen. I mean, it sounds like that didn't really stop the ball in motion, but like, what are other risks that you think about from a standpoint? I mean, it's coffee. Coffee is like alcohol. People are always going to drink coffee. People are always going to drink alcohol. So I get that, but just the dynamics. Maybe there's something in the past. Has there been like a major down season because of some issue in the history of Colombian coffee? But whatever it is, like, what other risks are out there to the ability to continue to grow in that market?
Agriculture, always you have to think about weather. That's one that you can, fluctuate year to year. Sometimes you have drier seasons, and that usually leads to increased production. The last year and a half or so, we've been having La Nina, which is weather patterns coming in from the Pacific, which has led to more rain here. So we've seen production in the country dropping some, but it's also driving up prices. The weather, what happens in coffee prices really depends on what's going on in Brazil. Is there a drought in Brazil? If there's a drought in Brazil, global prices go up. So it's almost like watching the weather in Brazil. But then it's also, okay, we have to diversify away from just selling kind of commodity products. So, if you can take one coffee cherry and it goes from a penny and becomes 4 because you're turning the cherry into alcohol, that hedges you away from falling prices or down production. If you can sell coffee as roasted coffee versus on a commodity basis as green coffee, again you're realizing more benefit from that same raw material. So it's thinking about weather, buying farms at the right elevation, all the science around climate change and what's to come over the next 40 to 50 years say coffee at below 1,400 meters is going to be a challenge. So we try to buy farms at the only the right elevations based on what we expect into the long term. The goal is not we get to 2026 and the business is over and the farms go away. Trying to build something beyond that and more lasting. So it's managing the weather from the fertilization standpoint. All of these kind of factors that go into growing, but weather is definitely a primary driver of a lot of the decision making that we undertake.
Makes sense. I know for me, again, I'm an investor. It's full disclosure, and there's a bunch of Gobundance people, at over 100 of them, I think, that have invested in green coffee. Right? What has been the number one reason why that you've been given? I mean, I guess amongst any investor, but it's a Gobundance podcast, so we'll go with some of the Gobundance guys or gals that have invested with you. Why are people investing? What do they see? What is the thing that there is? It just, hey, it's cool, it's a coffee company, or it's a Gobundance guy, yeah, we love them, or whatever. Right. What's some of the feedback you've gotten as to why somebody has decided to invest with you from the Gobundance side?
everybody wants to make money. They see the,
Duh.
I think, yeah, I think that's the name of the game. I think they see the opportunity of, it's a business that has, the U.S. headquarters, so there's a comfort there from the legal standpoint, tax standpoint, et cetera. They see the dominant kind of market position that we've been building. I think they see the path forward to an IPO or a sale. We're looking at big returns on big multiples on capital.
Such as what? What are the multiples?
Right now, we're in our Series C funding round. We started with 25 million of equity. We have about 3 million left to go for anybody who still wants to participate. Right now, we're trying to hit 11x on capital that's coming in right now in that 2026 exit. So 100,000, we're trying to do over $1 million. And I think
wait, 11x on new capital?
On new capital. Yeah.
So what does that mean for old capital?
You'll be doing better. Like your price, I'm trying to get you to 13. That's my mental target.
Well, is that just give me a sec? That's a massive multiple in my mind. Maybe I'm wrong though, but do you have any sort of precedent or sense of, because again, look, the model's being proven, right? Like
yeah.
As an investor, I think it was initially 7x. Honestly, that sounded big to me. Like, 4x is great. I'll take 4x, whatever. But I saw the business model. I understood what you were trying to do, or what Green Coffee's trying to do. To your point, I like that it's US based. And to be honest with you, I talk to people that are, to me, more savvy investors than I am that are Gobundance. That's the beauty of being a community like Gobundance. Like, hey, talk to me. Why did you, or even why didn't you for some people, right? And I got really good feedback overall. I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to go ahead and invest my money here. But honestly, 7x sounded really good if it could hit it. 150 would get you about $1 million, right? If you hit 7x. But I still thought, well, whatever. I'll take half of that. That's fine. But now we're talking 11x on new shares, right? On new share, and 13x for somebody like me who invested early. Is that normal? Like, because your trajectory is there, right? Like, hey man, check the box. You've doubled up the second largest coffee producer in the country. It's not like you're flailing. Like there's progression. So is that kind of what you've seen? 12, 11, 13x for an exit?
I mean, maybe it sounds too good to be true, but the numbers say that we can get there. I mean, you start out by having a reasonable buy-in valuation, right? So, we've raised about $56 million of capital to date. We're still pricing the business at about 90 million. So a very reasonable kind of increase to just literally pure cash and assets. Like you mentioned, we've had 100 Gobundance guys invest. 10 of them have come down here. Everybody who's come has liked what they've seen. But the big difference is the big drivers since you invested are everything we're doing in the byproduct business that adds tons of value. Everything that we're doing in the roasted coffee space. If we hit the numbers that we're looking at, you're looking at $1 billion plus company just by getting to the right net income multiple. So how do we do that? If you look at the S&P 500 over the last 50 years, the multiple of price to earnings is 20x. Right, so we need to basically build a $50 million company from an earnings perspective. Our growth trajectory is there. We need to execute. We really need to with the alcohol and the roasted coffee. But like by the time this comes out, we'll have given you guys the audited financials for the year: 10.1 million in revenue, 4.7 million in pre-tax earnings. So we're going in the right direction. The other thing that I think probably you like and a lot of the Gobundance guys like is you have a very heavy asset base and you have an actual business that's earning profit. Those are other key drivers. But just I think the potential's there, and everybody who comes sees the operation, meets the team, follows along what we're doing, seems to be pretty enthusiastic. But it's always an accident. Your question about what's the biggest risk factor is, are you guys executing appropriately?
Right.
And that's what we're on top of every day. You can't control all these external factors. Does it rain today? Does it rain tomorrow? But how do you manage, pivot, respond, deal with all those things to build the kind of company that we're talking about? But it sounds like big numbers, but it's really not that far off. You have companies like, if you look at some of the other, call it coffee companies out there that have, even though they're in different spaces, that have gone public in the last few years. So we saw a company last year go public, $1 million in revenue, $9 million loss, and they reached $100 million in the stock market, $100 million market cap. You know, you have companies like Black Rifle that are going public at like $1.7 billion valuations, but have never made any money. You know, this year we'll make almost $5 million of pure profit. So it's a completely different strategy, but we want that the business to be sound and operate. And we keep bringing more investors in because there's just so much more we can do with that capital. You know, if we get to the largest Arabica coffee producer in the world, now you've created a business that's maybe of interest to a Starbucks or a Nestle to buy, because you're materially shifting the amount of Colombian coffee that's going to their channels, right? You have control over that. You build an alcohol company, you become interesting to a Diageo of the world that's trying to scoop up brands. You build a roasted coffee company, you're creating something that has that kind of sustainability story, market presence that becomes attractive from a retail standpoint. So it's putting all these pieces together. It's a big task, definitely, but I think we can get there for our investors. That's what I stay awake at night thinking about.
No, I get it, and I you know, too good to be true isn't where I was going with it, but I get why. I wasn't meaning that. I was just like, wow, that's awesome. I just don't. Again, my small brain, I don't know precedent, but you just gave a lot of stats and data that make a lot of sense to me. So it's like, all right, game on. Let's go after it. Then. And like I said, we've seen the progression. I love the updates. You know, I get frequent updates, obviously, from you via email, YouTube videos, all of that stuff. I love kind of just I just got the one that said, "Hey, we just doubled up the number two coffee company in Colombia." So, yeah, man, it's been fun watching it, and I hope for all that you say is going to happen, of course, as an investor.
Me too. I hope your audience likes coffee too.
It's funny, I don't. My wife does though, so I went after it. But all right, most important. I mean, all of this amazing. Just on this, most important question is going to be: is it possible for the Bills to get past the Bengals and the Chiefs this season? Is this the year?
I don't think so.
I don't either. Unless they do something crazy, I don't either. What do they need? What do we need? Bills Nation, Bills Mafia. What do we need?
Have to be tougher. They played the Bengals in the playoffs, and it was watching a high school team play against Alabama. You know, it was just like man to man, especially on the line of scrimmage, just absolutely got dominated. But I don't know how you got to get bigger, you got to get stronger, you got to get tougher. So I hope they can do that, or be mad enough for a 60-minute game to pull something out. But some of these guys just got pummeled at home with all the momentum. You had, like, you know, the injury to DeMar Hamlin that kind of like fueling the team at the same time, and then you just go out there and it's just a man versus a boy getting pushed around. That's hard to fix. That's hard to fix.
Adam, where can people learn more about you, Green Coffee, if they're looking to invest, anything like that? Where can people get more information?
Yeah, Gobundance guys can always find me in the Facebook group. If anybody wants to reach out directly, email is adam.j@legacy-group.co. Love to always connect with more people. Anybody interested in Colombia, anybody interested in investing with us. Like I said, we're wrapping up the Series C funding round, a couple $1 million left. But anybody who's it's a good fit for now, wants to know more, follow along in the future, love to connect. And of course, if anybody's down in Colombia, to find me or look for recommendations.
Sure. Now, if somebody's outside, we have a lot of listeners that are not GoBundance members, but are accredited. Use that email or website they should go check out. What, where should they go?
Yeah, email's good if you want to get some more information on the business, both DCC, Legacy Group, the other portfolio companies we have, legacy-group.co. And as you mentioned, all of our investors have to be accredited. If you're looking at the coffee investment, we have $100,000 minimums.
Perfect. Appreciate it, man. Always fun connecting with you. Always fun chatting. Now we're doing it from
Thank you, sir.
From the southern part of the world, or well, southern part of the hemisphere. So
that's crazy. Life's interesting.
It is.
I don't know how.
Appreciate it. We'll talk soon. Thanks again.